Okay, so let's do our official welcome to our Teen Science Cafe. For those of you just joining and haven't been here before, I'm Lauren Traster. I'm the Teen and Leadership Program Coordinator for UVM Extension. I'm going to get my slides up right now. Give me 1 second. I want to get my chat open too. All right, so if you have not introduced yourself yet into our chat box, please do, because we always love to know who's here and who is participating. And maybe you all can just go ahead and do that again so Mariah will be able to get a sense of who is with us today. I am also going to put the close, that is not what I'm going to do. I am going to put the closed captioning information again, but we have Sydney from Colchester and Egan from Essex, Galani from Essex.
Awesome.
And Jack and Simon are here with us.
Seeing lots of Essex, that's great.
Yeah, we got a lot of Vermonters on. And then, oh, I missed Madeline's from Illinois. We always do get participants from other states.
Awesome.
So Madeline, I'm glad you could be here again. So for anybody who is new, what we do when we're here in Zoom land, all of you are muted, but that doesn't mean you cannot share your thoughts and ideas. And we do that 2 different ways. We use the chat box and we use the Q&A box, and we use them very differently. So the chat box is to have a conversation back and forth with our presenter, to respond to any questions that she might have. But for questions that you have, please put those in the Q&A box, because we'll get to those at different times. Obviously, if you really need to know something right away, then you'll throw it in the chat box, but hopefully most of your questions will go right in that Q&A box. And so in the Q&A box, there's a feature to upvote a question. It's a thumbs up and just moves a question up in the ranks. It's cool because we get to see if more people are interested in a question, but we answer all questions. So it doesn't really matter by moving a question up, because we'll make sure to get all the questions answered today. We ask that you be courteous to one another and don't create any distractions. And really the only way that distractions happen in this format is with the chat box. And so, obviously, I want you to stay on topic. Every now and then you might be adjacent to the topic, and that's fine. But if you're completely off topic, I will call you out. And if the chat box ever gets, really out of control, I will take away the feature that you can only talk to the panelists. So it's more fun to keep the chat box open. And honestly, Mariah, just so you know, these guys are great. They are usually right on topic and really engaged. So with that, I want you to stay engaged, participate fully, but I know you always do. So it's always fun. Before we get to today's presentation, I just want to remind you that, we do the Science Cafes every single week. Right now, we're doing our winter series, which started last week and goes until the 3rd week in March. And then we'll follow up with our spring series. Everything's posted at the website that you see posted below. And then we are starting a Learn to Code program tomorrow night. You can still sign up for that if you're interested. In this one, you're going to be learning how to create your own kind of collection game. And you'll have to show up to find out, because I'm not the programmer. I'm just one of the people helping to put it on. So I'm learning alongside of everyone else, because I don't know how to code. And then I just added a new program called Designing Your Future. We're working with an organization called Careers Click. And so this is a perfect program as you are in middle school and high school to begin thinking about your future and future careers. So it's a 3-series program. It's best if you attend all 3, but you can pick and choose. And they're on Wednesdays at lunchtime, noon to 1. And so you can check out that information and register at the www.edu/extension/u/announcements. So I just want to make you aware of that new program we just added. So I want to jump right in now and present today's cafe topic, which is network analysis for applications in biology. And our presenter is Mariah Boudreau. Mariah is a Ph.D. student in the Mathematical Sciences program at UVM. And she's also a National Science Foundation trainee in the Quantitative and Evolutionary STEM Traineeship, also known as QUEST, along with being a member of the Computational Story Lab in the Laboratory of Structure and Dynamics at the Complex Systems at UVM. That is a mouthful, but sounds really cool. She majored in mathematics at St. Michael's College for her undergraduate degree, which she got in 2019. And her research interests are in network analysis for biology applications, specifically the spread of disease in networks in the human body. And she's going to tell you all about this in her presentation today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Right.
Let's welcome Mariah to our Teen Science Cafe, and let's get ready to learn about her work.
All right. Hi, everybody. Apologies for my tardiness. Everyone has their technical difficulties. I had mine right before this, so my apologies, but we'll get right into it. So I'm Mariah Boudreau, and I'm going to talk to you about network analysis and its application to biology. So we'll go through an introduction, we'll get into the applications, some very general applications, and then we'll talk about epidemics as like the last biology application. That's one that I am just much more familiar with. That's where my research is currently. And then we'll talk about the conclusion. So introduction. Well, first, I have many Vermonters in the room, and I'm happy to say hi. And I was born and raised here. I'm from St. Albans, Vermont. There's a lovely view of it in my slide, and there's actually my family. We're not in Vermont for that picture, but we had ran up a mountain all together. And as Lauren had said, I recently, 2 years now, graduated from St. Michael's College right in Colchester, Vermont, with a bachelor's of science in mathematics. There's me. I was prepping an activity we were doing for math and cookies we were doing balloon art essentially. So actually getting into the nitty gritty part of this. So some definitions that we have to go over. What a network is. So what does network analysis even pertain to? So a network is a collection of objects connected to each other in some fashion. And then a graph is a network studied as a mathematical object. So these two items are the same thing, and I will use the words interchangeably, but network and a graph, very similar. And this is a different type of graph than you would see in any of your regular math classes. It's not with axes, it's just objects that are connected to each other in some way. And I'll show you a picture in just a minute. So, and to break down what makes up a graph or a network, we have a vertex, which will look like a circle, or it's an individual in a graph. We have an edge, which is a line connecting two of these circles to show a connection between these two vertices or these two individuals. We also have undirected graphs. So this just means there's a set of vertices with edges connecting them, and there's two-way relationships. So like say in a friendship, my best friend and I are connected because we have a friendship, but it's a two-way friendship. And then we say we have a directed graph. So there's direction on the lines between edges. So maybe talking about street networks, going down a one-way street. You can't go both ways down a street. So you have to have direction on an edge to show that it's only a one-way relationship. So here's what I'm talking about. It looks pretty simple, but there's a lot of fun math that can come along with these simple objects. So we're looking at an undirected graph. There are 6 vertices, they're all labeled, and then there are edges between all the numbered vertices or the numbered circles. All right, so question for you all that you can answer in the chat. What examples of graphs, undirected or directed, or networks are there in the real world? Are there any collections of objects that are connected to each other in some way? I actually said a few when I was talking about them, but anyone have any examples that they want to spit out that they think is a network? Constellations, yeah, perfect. There's different connections for constellations, forests, and ecosystems in general. Forests, we will talk about forests as we come up. Ecosystems, yes, there's many different types of networks in ecosystems. What are the lines on a map called? Borders. We can use borders. We can actually use, you can do a graph of states. So what states border each other, they can share. Contact tracing, we will also talk about that. I'm glad that someone mentioned that. And I'm also glad that you know what that is. Longitude and latitude, those are dots and lines, and that is a grid system. We will talk about lattices and grids. So that is a good example of a network. The internet, very, very good. The connections between computers and or the connections between websites. PCS, I'm not sure about that one. Maybe I don't know the acronym or PCs. Sorry. This is what happens when you read Zooms all the time. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the correction. Computers, yes, computers definitely have networks between them. So all your school computers are connected to the same hardwire or all the internet. Thank you for the clarification. All right, so you guys have lots of good examples of networks. I feel like you're gonna get a really good grasp on this. So some that I wanted to show to you, we have social networks. So all of your friends, all the vertices are actors or like people in your friend group, and the edges are the relationships between them. So you can have all the edges are the people who you consider friends. Transportation networks, we have, so say like airline networks, there's like JFK and Burlington are each a vertex and they're a hub or a stop. And then the travel route between each of the airports is an edge. Computer networks, someone said computers, fiber optics, that's a good one too. So we have computers as the vertices, edges are the transmission wires. We're going to get into biological networks and disease networks for what I'm going to talk to you about. So vertices in biological networks could be neurons, say in the brain, and dendrites, or like the connections between neurons and brains. There's also trees, and you can connect root systems and how close trees are for edges. Disease networks, you have hosts, so people who have, say, an infection and the people that they're in contact with that they could transfer it to. And some other graph theory terms, so we have adjacent, so when two vertices in a graph have an edge between them. All right, so you and a friend are adjacent if you have a friendship. Degree, the number of edges leading to a vertex. So what does this mean in, say, like a social network? How many friends do you have? How many connections do you have coming out or into you? A path, so between vertices X and Y, just for example, is a sequence of vertices that are connected to one another via edges. So it's just a path. So say I'm not friends with this person, but my friend is friends with them, and then my friend is also friends with another person. Or like in traffic, I want to get from this corner of an intersection to this corner, but I have to go along a bunch of different intersections to get to where I want to go. A tree is just a special type of graph in which all vertices are connected. There are no cycles. So a tree, think about like a family tree. So like you have your grandparents and your parents, and that is technically a network. And so family trees can, they don't have cycles. So you can't say like you're not related to someone above you, or like your child will always be below you in a tree. And then clustering coefficient. So all this means is that we have a measure to show how connected the vertices are with each other in a network. And clustering coefficient is going to come up in a very important term when we talk about the applications with the brain. So as an example, a question for all of you, are vertices 2 and 3 adjacent? Are they next to each other? Are they connected? And you can answer in the chat. I see a yes, another yes, yes, yes. All right, good. You're correct. How about 2 and 4? Are 2 and 4 adjacent? I see no with a question mark, no directly, but not directly. Okay, so adjacent is only one separation. I see a big no. Yeah, so they're not adjacent because there's not an edge connecting them immediately together. So 3 and 4 are adjacent because there's an edge between them, but 2 and 4 does not have a direct edge between them, so they are not adjacent. What about degree? So degree is how many connections an individual or a vertex has. What is the degree of vertex 1? Anyone know the 2? Perfect. Yep, there are 2 edges coming out of it. How about vertex 4? What's the degree of vertex 4? See a bunch of 3s. Perfect. Yep. You guys are naturals. All right. 6. How about 6? 6 is 1. All right. Someone already knew where we were going. 6 is 1. So 6 only has 1 connection. Can any of you describe a path for me? How would you say get from node or vertex 1 to vertex 6? What sequence of numbers would you do? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Yep. So you can go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 6, or 1 to 5 to 4 to 6. There's lots of options, and I love seeing them all. So that's just a path. That's how you can get from one edge of the network to another. Perfect. All right. So getting a little bit more complicated. Those are some pretty basic examples, but these are idealized networks. So these are just networks. These are categories of networks that scientists use to help describe applications that they're working with. So we're going to talk about random networks, lattice networks, small world networks, spatial networks, and scale-free networks. And so each of these types of networks describe how individuals or how vertices are described and how connections are formed between them. And it really depending on each of them. So any guesses as to what a random network might look like? A web, all right. Could look like a web. Anything else? Like a giant mess. I like where you're going with that. Sprawling, that's a good word to use. Scattered, that's also good. I think you guys are getting the idea. Cards thrown on a floor. I like that. A sharp blob. Whoever just said that, you are spot on. I feel like this is a very much a disorganized jumble of vertices and edges. So the properties of this graph are just determined in some random way. Tangled yarn, that's another great one. One way to form a random network is to say, I'm going to throw all of these vertices out in space, and I'm going to look at 2 pairs, and I'm going to say with probability P, I can choose whatever probability I want. I'm going to say I'm going to connect these 2. So that's, you randomly assign if they're going to be connected or not. These networks, this idealized network usually has shortest average paths. So it has very short path lengths. So that means it doesn't take long to say, if this was a social network or in your friendship, it doesn't take me very long to see how far away a friend is from me, or like a traffic network. It's very easy to get around the traffic network because all the average path lengths are very short. It has a low clustering coefficient, so this means it's not really connected that well. There's not much good connectivity between all the individuals in the network. There's also homogeneity. So homogeneity just means that all the vertices act or have similar properties to them. So homo being the same, and then if it were heterogeneous, that all the vertices would act differently. So homogeneity, a lot of the properties between all the individuals are the similar. So in a friendship network, you and your friends have about the same number of friends. That's what that means. Lattices. All right. Lattices actually looks a lot nicer than a random network. So for a 1D ring lattice, these vertices are set up on a circle. And so each vertex is connected to k nearest neighbors. So for instance, in our example, it's connected to 4 nearest neighbors. So it has its connections right on the side of it, but then those arcs bow out to connect to 2 other individuals that are a little bit further away from them. So there's high clustering in these. So all these nodes are all these vertices are very, very interconnected. And you can tell it just looks like they're all super connected. They have really long, they actually have long paths. So it takes a really long time to get from one side of the circle to the other. You have to go through a lot of different vertices. And it also is very homogeneous on an individual level. So that just means that all the vertices have essentially the same number of edges leaving them. Small world networks. So does this look similar to the one we just talked about? What's the main difference between this picture and the picture I just showed you? The lines in the middle. Yep, good job, Madeline. So the lines, yep, lines in the middle. So this is just saying we're gonna combine some of the characteristics from our two previous models. And we're gonna say we're gonna take some of the random network aspects and we're gonna take the lattice structure and we're gonna squish them together. So all this is you take a lattice, so you take the picture we had previous to this slide, and I'm just gonna add some random lines in the middle of the circle to connect some of the vertices. So what this does is you still have high clusterings. Everyone's still super connected and super interconnected. This actually shortens the path lengths because now I have a shortcut essentially to get from one side of the circle to the next. So that these random networks actually, or these random added edges really help with how quickly you can maneuver this network. An example, this is social networks. So like you and your friends are very much like all in the same friend group, all in like a tight knit group. But say you have a friend who doesn't go to school with you and goes to a different school, that's your random edge across the network. So you guys might have some pretty far mutual friends, but like that random connection really brings you from one side of the circle to the other side. This is also a cool idea of there was a social experiment done by this guy Milgram. He sent out a ton of letters back when snail mail was really big. He sent out a ton of letters to people out in the Midwest. And his goal was he wanted to see how many people it took to get that letter sent out in the Midwest back to this specific person outside of Boston, Massachusetts. How many people do you think it took to get those letters from Midwest back into Boston? We have one guess of 6. Someone said a lot. Any other guesses? 10. 32, 18, loving it. 25, above 10, maybe. So the answer is actually kind of in the slide. 6 degrees of separation. And the first person who wrote, and it went farther up in my chat, so I can't read the name. You know who you are. It was 6. On average, it took 6 people to get that letter back. That just shows how interconnected our world is. So arguably, you're only 6 people away from everybody else in the world. I had a question on Milgram at Scholars Book yesterday. Love it. That's perfect. Perfect timing. All right, moving on from small world. That's why everyone talks. So part of this saying you're only 6 people away from everybody in the world. It's a small world after all, right? So spatial networks, these are used if you're talking about, if you're wanting to specifically put vertices somewhere locationally. So maybe mapping out maps or other things for geography. The vertices are embedded in space, so they don't move. And they're also connected by a certain probability. We don't have to get much into these details. And then scale-free is our last idealized network. So this is just one where the main property of this network is most of the vertices will be relatively poorly connected. So they don't really have that many edges, and they don't have a high degree, they have a low degree. While select minority of hubs will be very highly interconnected. So these networks have hubs. So if you think about like airline networks, like JFK is a huge hub for say JetBlue and a ton of other airlines, but Burlington doesn't necessarily have that many connections out of it. Like you can't fly everywhere in the world from the Burlington airport. For an example, sorry for anyone who's not in Vermont, using Burlington as an example. So the part of this is as you add more vertices to this network, there ends up being, you want to be connected to a hub. You're really, you're really more likely to be connected to the people who are really interconnected. So like if you were to join a new school too, you would probably meet one of the kids who has a lot of friends because they have a lot of friends. So then you end up knowing them. So this also provides some heterogeneity. So there's a lot of differences between the nodes in these networks. Some people are super connected and some people aren't connected at all. So are there any questions? I know that was a little fast, but are there any questions about any of the things that we've talked about? Because we're starting to get into applications now.
There's nothing in the Q&A yet, but you guys know, just feel free at any point to put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them. So I think we can move on at the moment.
Perfect. And I have the chat up so I can see it. So neural networks, first biology application. How could the brain be represented as a network? And you can answer in the chat.
There's always a delay. I'm guessing there's a few writing frantically right now.
I was about to say senses. All right, that's good. Yep, connecting the senses and the different parts of the brain. Neurons connected to neurons. Very good. That is part of what we're going to be talking about. Memory, neurons, dendrites. Yep, I mentioned those. Good. Dendrites is a good word. I'd say neurons. Yep. So neurons is pretty much bones. Okay. The bones, that is a good, I didn't think about that. That would be a good application for skeletal systems for sure. Nerves sending signals to the brain. Yeah. Think about how you can touch and feel everything from your fingers. Obviously those have to transmit up into your brain so that you can tell that you're feeling something. Muscles also. So many applications for this. Really, you can say anything. It's pretty awesome. So for what I'm going to talk about, the vertices in our instances are the neurons, or the areas of the brain. The edges, so the connections, are the dendrites, which is just a part of a neuron that connects neurons, or it's a pathway between the areas of the brain. How people construct these, how do they actually use these in real life? Data is gathered from EEGs or MEGs or MRIs. So these are just fancy scans that you might have heard of that are used by doctors. And they can take these scans and they construct these graphs and networks. So the vertices then describe either where all the microelectrodes or the sensors are, depending on what kind of scan you have. And then the edges are then the correlations and the connections between the different parts of the brain or wherever the sensors are placed. So there are network measures that we can perform on neural networks. So I was talked about path length and clustering coefficient before this. So shortest path length is a measure that we could think about. And then clustering coefficient is also something we could think about. The paper I am referencing here actually looked up and had this quote: women had shorter path length and higher clustering, and then women show greater overall cortical connectivity and more efficient networks. I'm not sure what that means in the grand scheme of things. You can take your own interpretation, but it was very interesting to see that they did see a difference between men and women's brains and how they were connected. So why do we think shortest paths and connectivity matter in brain networks? We're smarter. Why might we want to think about shortest paths or how connected a brain is? You think it makes a difference? Does hormones, does taking hormones affect that? I don't know if hormones affects that. Faster thoughts, stronger connections, that's also a good possibility. Quick reaction, memory loss could be associated with that. How you process information. So efficiency, yes, very good. So one example, there are many examples, but one example is that in disabilities, someone just beat me to the punch, possibly. In schizophrenics, so people who have schizophrenia, studies have shown lower clustering and shorter path lengths. Other measures like centrality were also lower in people with schizophrenia compared to the people without schizophrenia. So maybe looking at some scans and you are comparing someone who has schizophrenia and someone who doesn't, you might look at their graph structures of their brains and see some big differences between how the networks are connected and the different measures that are associated with it. What about people who are intersex? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that study looked at what you're referring to, but that could be something to look into. Now, quick transition from brains to forest fires. How could a forest be represented as a network? The roots, a network of a tree, very good. Roots connecting, maybe food chain, that's also a good, the trees could definitely be in that. Yes, the roots. So there are roots, food web, not chain, all good. Totally understand what you're saying. Fungi actually. Yes, you could totally show fungi networks. And
I gotta say though, Simon, nice reference to a previous science cafe where they learned about that.
Oh, really? That's perfect. Maybe I'll have to get the name of whoever did your science cafe. Maybe we can talk about networks with fungi. Balance of life, like in a forest. Good. Lots of ideas. So for this example, all of your answers, totally perfect, great answers, can do that. For forest fires, we're going to say the vertices are trees and the edges are the avenue or the way that a fire can pass between trees. So a fire can move through a network by having one tree on fire. Say a lightning strike just took out one of the vertices. Then with a probability of spreading to another tree, you can assign this probability. Say it's a 50-50 chance of if two trees are connected, there's a 50-50 chance of that fire spreading. So that's just an example. That it could be an 80-20% chance or something like that. And then you could also simulate this type of problem in a computer network and show how much of the forest this fire will engulf. Why might we want to do that? Why might we want to simulate forest fires with varying probabilities, so different p-values for the transfer of fire, and simulate them all? Also, whoever said they were super excited about coding coming up in the next few days, you can code all this stuff. There's a way to do that. You can do these simulations with very easy code. And it'd be awesome if you could learn how to do that. See how fast they can spread. Very, very good answer. So we know which parts of the forest may be more affected. Very good. These are all fantastic answers. I wasn't sure if probably some other people might be writing. But good. Yeah. The two answers that were just given, Madeline and Catherine, those are great. Those are great answers. And other reasons why we might want to model this is, one, to show how fast it'll spread, two, how it'll affect the forest, three, can we model it to show where we should build like firewalls? Where should we not have trees so closely connected where it could spread too far? So like people dig ditches in forests to make sure that the fire doesn't go past a certain point or things of that nature. So it's a good prevention strategy. Not only can we see how the fire might end up, but we could intervene and see how this goes. And this is a good segue into epidemics. So spread of disease is actually kind of similar to spread of forest fires. I'm reading very cool, Madeline. I like that. I like that you're having connections. Spread of disease. So we're going to say the vertices is a person or an individual. And then the edges are the contacts between individuals. So contacts are only included, so edges are only included if they provide a transmission. So this varies depending on the infection. So say we have something like the flu. You can, if you cough on someone, that's a connection. But you might not be connected to someone who's on the totally other side of the room, masked and all of that. Or say lice, like you have to be in direct contact with people with lice and to make sure that they can actually like transfer into the other person. But then sometimes distance is a bigger issue. So it really depends on the infection we're talking about as to how the edges are defined between people. So how to construct this? It's not practical to know every single relationship in a population. That's actually really hard to track because there are so many people in the world, and to know all about all the individuals in a population. So ideas we want to try and think about and incorporate are connections should only be included if they allow the transfer of infection, like I said before. And there are different assumptions and protocols for actually collecting data on if people can transfer this. So there are actually quite a few techniques, and someone mentioned one pretty early on about how to gather info on networks used for this. Include infection tracing, contact tracing, which how many of you have heard contact tracing? Got one? Everyone? Correct. Contact tracing has probably been a big buzzword given that we're in the middle of a very large outbreak of a spread of disease. So I'm glad that you know about it. The other two, infection tracing and diary-based studies, might not be as familiar. Contact tracing is actually pretty much the one that epidemiologists and people at the CDC use. Okay, so you've heard about some of these strategies. Can you guess, say what like diary-based studies might be? Or infection tracing? Any idea about, we know about contact tracing, but you want to try and describe ways to gather information about people to see if they can spread disease? You have to name everyone you've been around. Good. So that comes up in contact tracing. If you get sick, you have to list off the people who you've been around. I think infection tracing is like mapping out infections. Good. Yep. Taking blood, always good information to gather from people. You keep track of everyone you came in contact with. Contact tracing, kind of like keeping a food diary to figure out intolerance. That's a very good connection. I like that analogy. So you guys are like hitting it on the head. Infection tracing, which is our first one, determines how infection is spread. So it actually shows a transmission network. So instead of being like, oh, I'm sick, you end up getting a tree-like structure to say who actually spread the disease or the infection from one person to another. So these dotted lines in my purple squared off graph could show possible infection. But the solid lines show that it went from this person to this person, and this person was the source. Contact tracing, which a lot of you know about, probably tell me everything that's already on this slide, looks at potential transmission contacts of a person. So shows who could be infected, and then we have to adjust for that. Some problems that could come up in it: suffers from network definition issues. It can actually be pretty time consuming. Like contact tracing, the CDC and the health department has a lot of people keeping up with contact tracing because everyone you interact with, they have to get in touch with to make sure that they're doing what they need to do to keep everybody else around them safe. This also relies on individuals to be completely accurate in their information. So it might just be a mistake of like, say I get sick and I'm trying to list out all the people who I've been in contact with, and say I forgot that I happened to, in pre-COVID times, say I happened to go to a workout class and like was talking with someone after class and was like really close, and we could have I could have given them a disease or like an infection just from like having a cough near them. And so the purpose of this type of tracking is just to treat and quarantine those who may have been infected. And everyone is much more familiar with this now than when if I've mentioned this, say, a year ago. Then diary-based studies. So this is our last way of tracking infections. The advantage is it takes the workload off of the researcher. So people at the CDC or the health department don't really have to do much in this type of strategy. All it is it has the people who are in the population, they got to track their own, who they're talking to, if they get sick. And then they have to tell other people about if they get sick or whatnot. So it really takes on the personal responsibility of the people who could get sick or in the population. The issue with this is it relies heavily on people doing a really good job of keeping track of all their information, which can be hard when you're juggling school or everything else in your life, family, all of these things. And this can result in a lot of large unconnected subnetworks. So you won't really see, you kind of miss the connections between people because there's a little bit of lack of information. So now we're getting into models. So how do we model this? How do we use math to get into this? So about 70 years ago, these guys, William Kermack and A.G. McKendrick, very, very, very famous network model for spread of disease. We have an SIR model. So S being susceptible, I being infected, R being removed. Each node in the network is categorized by these states and can be applied to network theory by assuming states of the individuals. So does anyone want to take a guess what we'll stay on this slide. I knew I had to transition. Anyone want to guess, when are you susceptible? When are you a susceptible individual in a network where disease is spreading? When you've had contact with someone with the disease, when you come in contact with someone with disease. So close. Susceptible is when you don't have the disease, but you haven't come in contact with anybody yet. You're susceptible when you're healthy. All right. So susceptible means you could get it, but you haven't. So anyone in the population, even if you're not around people who are infected, are susceptible to a disease. This model actually gets a little bit more intricate when you start introducing, say, things like vaccines and other things like that, but we're going pretty basic. We're assuming that we don't have a vaccine, we don't have anything. Everyone could get the disease, so everyone at the start is susceptible. Who's infected? What does it mean to be an infected person, infected vertex in this network? To have the disease, sick. Yep, you have the infection, you're infected. So anyone assigned with I is infected and could transfer it to people who are susceptible. You have the cough. Oh, geez. And then R, what do you think removed means? Anyone think they know what removed means in this context? You've had it and you're cured. You have perished or have conquered the disease. Perished is a good word. Or maybe dead. So recovery, depending on the disease, can either mean you're totally cured, something else happened, or you're just removed from the network. So maybe something happened where you're totally immune and you don't have it anymore, or the disease was deadly and it caused you to pass away. So it's good to, it's not good. You need to track all of these instances, and it's kind of scary to think that like you could get into a recovery state, or people talk about it as death. So it's a pretty easy cycle to follow. You go from being susceptible to getting the infection, and then you recover, and then depending on the disease, you can go back to being susceptible if you are no longer immune. So that happens with the flu season every year. You get the flu, you recover, but then you can get the flu again, right? So then when it comes to epidemics, we have this type of growth. It's called logistic growth, and it's a predictable course that epidemics should follow. So we have slow growth phase. So most effective stage to prevent an epidemic. You want to try and grab an epidemic and stop it in its tracks in slow growth phase. This is hard to do though, because there's so many small number of cases, so the small number of eyes. That's why the eye circle on the top of this picture is so small, leading into a big S. So there's a lot of susceptible people. There's a lot of people who could get sick. Explosive phase means there's many infected, there's many people who are sick, and there's many people who could get sick, and the rate of new infection is maximized. So it's really hard to stop the infection from stopping at explosive stage. Then burnout phase is when either everyone's sick or everyone's had the disease or infection, and there aren't many other people to infect or get sick. So it kind of just slowly, the numbers start dropping off really, really slowly. And you can show it in this graph. So we're going, there's a few number of people who are infected, and then all of a sudden we shoot off in it's a 1-to-1 ratio of like infecting people. And then we burn out because we've run out of people to infect. So this gets us into a reproductive rate. And so a common phrase used in epidemiology and public health, and like sometimes you could hear on the news, is the R0 value. So the average number of new infectives generated by each currently infected individual. So this is just the average number of people I could infect if I were sick. And that's for the whole entire population. So when this reproductive rate is less than 0, the disease will die out. It won't get into explosive phase. When it's greater than 1, or did I say less than 1? If I said 0, I apologize. When greater than 1, you get into explosive growth and you can start spreading it really easily. So then we have a threshold. So the realm in between these two extremes where there's a 1-to-1 ratio of a transmission. So the threshold for this is if the reproductive rate is equal to 1. That is, if it hits 1 and goes above it, you get into explosive phase. That's why it's a threshold. So threshold is analogous to a critical point at which a giant component or a huge chunk of the population will become infected. And so then quickly, you can approach this type of spread of disease through a physicist approach. It's called percolation theory. I'm just going to give you the basics of. Physicists are funny, and they decide to rename our namings of things in graphs. So vertices are then sites, edges are now bonds. Occupation probability is the probability of a person, so an individual, a site being occupied with a disease, so the probability of you getting a disease. A cluster is where is a clump of sites or clump of vertices that all become infected. And then we have a percolating cluster, so a single cluster, a single clump of the population of susceptible sites or susceptible people, where the epidemic just gets in there and it depends on that clump to just spread completely through. And then percolation, so to have percolation is to hit that threshold, to have a reproductive number over 1. And so to finish this off a little bit, probability generating functions, I'm not going to give you the details of them, but I'm going to mention them. The reason I'm mentioning them is they are what I research. So percolation theory is used or probability generating functions use percolation theory to model these. So I can model how a disease spreads through a toy population, or like a population that someone gives me, like a practice population. And all PGFs are polynomials that use probabilities as their coefficients. And you can solve these probabilities. So if you ever think that polynomials are never going to be used, they're used a lot. And especially the basis of this modeling tool is polynomials. So your x squared plus y squared, or x squared plus x plus 2 is an example of a polynomial. So you can solve for your giant component, or the chunk of your population that gets sick in the final outbreak size of an epidemic. So conclusion, I'm hoping, yep, we're hitting right around 4:30, so that's good. In summary, I know I went over a lot of stuff, but in summary, networks and graphs can be described. They can describe many systems. in and outside of biology. I just happened to focus on some of the biology. Idealized networks, so all those pictures I showed you give a baseline for different structured networks. Characteristics of a network can be measured and very useful in analysis. Networks can describe either connectivity of rain, forest systems and its vulnerability to fire, spread of infection, many other applications, food webs, root systems, pollinator systems, social networks, traffic networks, airline networks. It's awesome. This is why I love math, because it's universal. It can be used everywhere. And I had some references, but I just wanted to thank you guys for letting me talk about all of this stuff to you. And I'm glad you all interacted. And thank you so much for your commentary. And my email is on the slide. And if you have any more questions about anything, we have time.
Yes, so that was fantastic. So before we get to questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll right now, just as we always like to get feedback, what your overall experience was and how much you learned from Mariah today. And go into the Q&A. You can, if you have any questions for Mariah before we sign off today, we do have time for questions. So we'll see what you guys want to know. But we'll just finish up this poll first. Try to get a couple more people to respond. I'll give it about 10 seconds. Anyone else? There we go. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for doing that. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A yet, or you guys can type it into the chat. And if, let's see.
I know there's not a lot of questions, but this was really well explained. Oh, thank you. And today's presentation was really good. Thank you so much for your compliment.
Say that. I agree. I don't know anything about high level math, and I actually was able to follow you quite well. And I don't know how many of you on the call today are into math, but I think it was really cool to see the ways that math is applied in the real world. And so I love how you kept pointing out, like, this is, you know, we use this and you'll use polynomials and
exactly. Like,
yeah.
Someone said it's nice to know that polynomials do have a use and an important one. Correct. Yeah.
I do remember when I was in calculus constantly challenging my teacher, like, when am I ever going to use this?
And if any of you have any questions about things in math, that are you ever going to use it? I bet I can pull an answer out for you. I like math too.
Math is used for more than just calculating your taxes. So
yes,
do any of you have other questions about like Mariah's path in math? And
you can talk about I am from Vermont. I went to undergrad in Vermont. I'm at UVM. If you have questions about UVM or like how I got into math, or if you have questions on math classes, how did you get into mathematics? All right, perfect. Okay. I think it was like 8th grade algebra. And when I had the option to take calculus early, or not calculus, I had the option to take algebra early, and things just like kind of clicked. I liked order. I liked that there was a flow to things. I didn't have to question math. So really from like 7th, 8th grade, I started doing it and I really enjoyed it. I actually did a math league in high school as well, because it's fun problem solving. I saw math as problem solving. So I really enjoyed puzzles and Sudoku and things of that nature. So yes, I was a mathlete in high school and it was a fun time. What classes would you take if you went back to high school, or better say, were there any classes you missed that you wish you didn't?
That's a great question.
That's a very good question, Catherine. One class that I was a little sad to miss in high school was AP Stats, so AP Statistics. I did take statistics classes in college, but in high school, I didn't think to take it because I was taking calculus. But statistics is very, very cool and just a whole other realm of math. And actually, funny that I say realm of math. I have up next to my computer a map of mathematics. You can honestly look this up anywhere, but it just shows you all the different areas of math that you can get into. Someone's laughing at probably me having it pinned up.
No, that ha was there before. So
okay, just checking. But no, so classes, I would encourage geometry is for anyone who's a visual learner, that you get to work with the shapes and spatial features. Algebra is problem solving. Probability and statistics. Statistics comes up everywhere and it's so applicable. Like if you're into sports, there's sports stats. If you're into biology or like public health, there's a huge
but I would add to that. So I was straight up social science and undergrad and graduate school, and I needed to take a stats class in order to do my master's thesis, which was full on just social science, but you needed stats in order to do that work. So stats do come up everywhere.
I want to be a writer and I also want to learn math to basically write a book and then code it into a game. I like that. Cool. That's awesome. Yes. If you want to get into coding, if anyone is super interested in coding, math is very important to use while coding because of structural pieces and like logic. It sounds really funny, but logic is a huge part of mathematics and it comes into computer science. So like considering if either ors or like and statements, that's very mathematical. It's very logic based. So it's, as I said before, I think math is universal, and you can apply math to any area and it gives you so much freedom to move to different areas. I want to be a lawyer, but money management is something I'll need in my life. Is there anything to do with business, like statistics? So statistics will be very helpful in business. So if you want to be an investor and if you want to figure out mortgages, I taught a math class for undergrads at UVM this past last year. And I actually did a project on where they had to open a savings account. They had to open a CD, which is a savings account that has restrictions on it. I had to have them buy a house. I had to have them do all these details with interest rates and taxes. So even just your basic math classes, like if math classes like personal finance are super important to take.
Yeah. And I would say even being a lawyer, depending on the case that you get,
exactly.
Again, it goes back to problem solving, understanding how to look at things, the structure. It ends up being really applicable to almost any career that you get. And yeah, Adewin says stats is also really useful in law. There's a lot of cases where you'll need to analyze evidence. Exactly.
So, and like there's timelines, like can someone feasibly be from get to this location that you're saying they got to as a lawyer? Like it's all about problem solving and connecting the dots and seeing if things actually could physically work out the way that they're supposed to. Like the car was here at this time. Is it possible to even like get to a different place fast enough?
I will share with you a good friend of mine was majored in math in college and went to work for a consulting company type place after college where they used all the math and stats and were expert witnesses for lawyers in their cases. So you as the lawyer may not necessarily need to do it, but you need to be smart enough to know that you need to hire the statistician who can help make your case for you.
Your mom is a consultant. That's interesting, Egan.
Yeah, you guys, these are great questions. So is there we have a few more minutes. Anything else you would like to ask Mariah and learn about how math is ever present in our world and can be a really fun career direction, or at least education?
Exactly. It gives you flexibility. I'm actually in my program, my Quest program, there's a lot of biology people in it, which is great, and I get to learn so much from them, but they get to learn from me, and I get to, it's fun to have the give and take. But they have always said, they're like, I was told early on, sometimes getting the quantitative skills is the hardest part, but it's also opens so many doors, because you can always learn about the biology or the chemistry or any other application afterwards. But if you have your math down, it's really easy for the application. Oh,
Yeah.
Patrick, your mom works in the grad college at UVM. Maybe I know her. Maybe I've met her. Oh,
Oh,
great.
that's great.
I'm glad that your parents are recommending this to you and you have connections to UVM and everything. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, if there are no final questions, we will, let's all thank Mariah for her presentation today. You guys know, same time, same place next week. We have a professor who's going to be talking about the work he does specifically in environmental engineering as it applies to agricultural waste and using microbiomes, and he'll go into all of that, but it sounds really interesting and really cool. So I hope you all come back next week. You know how to register, and we will see you again. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.